The bright side of addiction, that's recovery. And recovery is its own best reward. Hi, everyone. I'm Neil Scott, and if you're new to our podcast, welcome. And if you've been here before, welcome back. Hey, if you're in recovery or know or love someone who is, or you simply want to know more about the recovery process, or maybe you're a bit concerned about someone that you know or love who may be harmfully using alcohol or any other drug, this is the podcast for you. We carry the message of hope and the promise of recovery. And a reminder, you can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. Recent episodes have featured interviews with rock and roll legend Dion, Tom Farley, the brother of the late Chris Farley, astronaut Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon, and Broadway legend Ben Vereen, plus conversations with everyday people in long-term recovery, sharing their story, their insight, and their path. Now, in this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, a conversation with Darryl W, who avoided death and destruction time and time again until the path to long-term recovery was revealed to him. It's an absolutely wild story of what it was like in the drinking and using days and what it's like now. Here's a quick clip from today's podcast.
I went to 500 meetings in my first 365 days of sobriety. I went through 4 sponsors in the first 5 weeks. Finally found the guy that I started working with. I can't really remember the exact date, but I think it was within the first 6 weeks. I mean, I knew that this is where I had to stick and this is where I had to stay.
My conversation with Darryl is coming up. And we will conclude our podcast with some thoughts on recovery from actor Charlie Sheen on making amends. Our website is recoverycoasttocoast.org. If you'd like to help us out financially, or you know of a foundation or maybe a company that might be interested in underwriting our program, we would be ever so grateful. A reminder, our email address, recoverycoasttocoast, one word, at comcast.net. We'd love to hear from you. Recovery Coast to Coast is supported by Sundown M Ranch. That's one of America's oldest, least expensive, and most successful treatment programs. In fact, they're listed in the Newsweek magazine's recent list of America's top treatment providers. Sundown M Ranch has been successfully treating addictive disease. It's now 57 years. That's a long time. Back in 1968, when they first started, they treated 102 patients. Since then, they've treated some 200,000 adults, adolescents, family members. Their success speaks for itself. They have an outstanding staff, too, by the way, and it's been together for a long time. They're well paid. They love working there. And, of course, it's a not-for-profit treatment program. That means the focus is on personal recovery, long-term recovery, not the financial bottom line. They own their own land so they can keep their rates low. In fact, Sundown has some of the lowest rates in the country, and they take most insurance plans. Treatment at Sundown is abstinence-based, 12-step centered, providing a full range of services, including detox, individual and group therapy, patient education, and a comprehensive family program. They provide continuing care planning. They create a bridge from treatment back to the family and the community. They don't just treat and release. Their motto is the patient is the reason we are here. There are thousands of addiction treatment programs in this country, a lot of good ones, and of course a lot of bad actors as well. I believe Sundown is one of the best in the country. But do your homework. It's a big decision. But please consider Sundown M Ranch in your search. Sundown M Ranch, it's where recovery begins. Sundown.org. Time to pour a cup of coffee. Conversation time. I invite you to join me for a cup of coffee or whatever your beverage happens to be. I want to share a conversation I had with Darryl W, a grateful person in long-term recovery. He came from a dysfunctional family, had numerous run-ins with the law, including one time when he drove drunk right into a private home, into a couple's bedroom. After a lifetime of addiction and trauma, Darryl is now in long-term recovery. Here is my conversation with Darryl W.
Darryl W. joining us. He is a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He has been in recovery for 2 years and 4 months. And I imagine if I probably asked Darryl, he could tell me how many days to the day. Could you do that?
Yeah, I got 868 days.
But who's counting, right?
Who's counting?
Yeah,
I am.
absolutely. And you also count the number of AA meetings that you've been to, which is kind of interesting.
Recovery meetings in general. I go to several different recovery type meetings.
And how many, you put them all
I got
together?
978 meetings.
Coming up on the big 1,000.
1,000.
What are you going to do anything to celebrate?
I'm not going to drink.
There you go. There you go. Darryl, tell us about your story. Go back to the very beginning, if you would, in terms of your drinking. When did it all begin for you?
I couldn't tell you exactly the exact time. I grew up in a family that both of my parents were alcoholics. My grandmother owned a liquor store, and I had a lot of drinking in my family. I recall, my father giving me alcohol at a really young age, not large amounts, but small amounts.
Why would he do that?
I'm not really sure. I think my father is a person that, I guess I can't really speak for him, but, to this day, I know that he still drinks regularly.
You have brothers and sisters?
I have a sister, and I have a brother who died about 15 years ago. Yeah, he had complications. My mother, she drank and did prescription pills and smoked cigarettes through all 3 of her pregnancies, and on the result of that, my brother had holes, in his heart valves and stuff, and he had 2 open heart surgeries by the time he was 6 years old, and then, he became active in alcoholism. He misused his, all his medications and stuff for his heart problems, so he died at 28 from complications from alcoholism and drug addiction. I remember that I've gotten drunk a lot in my life, and the repercussions were plenty, and it was something that I did for, I'd say, at the age of 44 I am now, I've drank pretty heavily up until this past 2 years and 4 months for, a good 30 years.
What did the alcohol do for you early on, Darryl?
My family were very, very abusive, very chaotic. I mean, just a lot of yelling and swearing and, being told what to do and not to do. I was really looking for an escape from that. Yeah, I didn't really have any knowledge about what I was or who I was supposed to be. And, I didn't really know what, esteem was at the time. But, I had really, come to know now that I had no self-esteem or really no belief in myself or no understanding about why my world was so crazy and chaotic, and it gave me an opportunity to feel a little different and act a little different, a different group of people that accepted me and seemed to understand me, even though I didn't understand it at the time.
So basically it was a social lubricant for you.
Social lubricant, that's very common, that that people think that people state, yeah.
Did you hang around with a bunch of kids who also drank and used?
Yeah, that was, as an early age, as far back as in elementary school. I had, got around with people that were in similar situations as I was and had the same type of life and the same type of parents. Once I had gotten out of elementary school and into junior high school, I was pretty much off and running. The kids in the neighborhood or different places that I hung out with, that's the kind of things that they did. That's the kind of people I was attracted to, and that seemed to be the kind of people that were attracted to me.
And the alcohol use was also in combination with a number of other drugs as well.
Yeah, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. I mean, I was pretty young in the 60s, especially in the 70s. When I went to high school, smoking marijuana and, taking other pills and stuff was just real common. I mean, there was even teachers in our schools and stuff, in our junior high school and our high school, that were, were known for smoking pot with the kids and stuff like that. And, it was really a common thing for everybody to meet in the parking lot before, it was a little bit more into, the beginning of high school and stuff, but to meet in the parking lot before school and everybody to smoke pot. And, by the time I had gotten up into a high school around 11th grade, we were, drinking beer and drinking alcohol on the way to school and have a 6-pack on the way to school, driving to school. That was about 11th grade.
Well, how did that affect your grades?
Well, by the time I was in 11th grade, I was in a vocational school. That was pretty much the school that people that didn't get along so well in the regular high school were sent there. And
So you did not get along? I mean, were you a problem student? Were
I
you
was a problem student. I had barely passed through all of my grades. I literally slid through. I remember, having grade point averages of like 1.6 and still making it through, and I know that was a long time ago and things were different. This was back in the Midwest and, things were different. Now they'd probably, maybe send you back. But, by the time I had gotten out of elementary school, I had already been arrested several times.
For what?
I, attempted to set my school on fire in like 6th grade, and I not only attempted, but I succeeded in setting, the woods and stuff by my house and the school on fire, and by the time I was, out of junior high school, I had been suspended from school several times for fighting. I remember I had a broken wrist one time and a cast, and I literally beat some guy with my cast because I was upset with this guy. And it's, I had literally been, physically abused from my parents up until I was 13 years old. So this type of behavior and stuff was real common, and it was familiar to me.
So you tried to burn down your school,
Yeah.
but you got caught, I assume.
I got caught, yeah.
What happened?
I did set the, waste paper basket on fire in the bathroom in 6th grade.
How'd they know it was you?
Well, they went into somehow they knew it was me, and they ended up in our classroom, and they asked who did it, and everybody had to stand up in the hall, and and eventually.
You finally copped to it.
And I had been arrested several times before that in 5th and 6th grade for shoplifting and stuff at some of the local.
So you were really acting out behind your addiction.
This was in elementary school. I hadn't gotten into a regular usage of stuff, but I remember, sneaking a sip here and there. I mean, by the time I was in junior high school, I had been going into stores and supermarkets and stealing liquor, and had been, caught. But when you're, back in the 70s, early 70s, and you're 13 years old stealing liquor, they didn't throw you behind bars yet back then. I had been in juvenile court, and they pretty much left the parents responsible for taking care of you back then. It's a lot different now. But
I know you said your parents were alcoholic, but how did they respond, Darryl, when you started getting into all this trouble? And you're trying to burn your damn school down, for Pete's sakes.
Well, I mean, to be completely honest with you, I was getting physically abused, beaten and hit by my parents on a regular basis for everything.
Right.
I mean,
so this just gave them license to just wail on you even more.
Yeah. And then the thing is, I've talked to, some people about this since, but, back then, they actually gave this type of punishment in the schools. The counselors and the principals and the vice principals would hit you with paddles and stuff.
I believe that was called corporal punishment.
Yeah, and it's you're getting it at school, and it's they're not really doing anything to understand or try to really, and then they're giving it to you again thinking, I guess they thought that they were going to straighten you out that way, but that only served to make me even more and more angry. So I started to grow up very early with a general, is the word disdain towards any type of authority. And
wow, you were incorrigible. So you get arrested at an early age for a whole lot of different offenses. The addiction continues. You continue to use pot and other drugs, and you continue to drink. How did you get into the vocational school? You were expelled?
No, I wasn't expelled. It's just, by the time I was in 10th grade, I had heard about, there's this school, this county school that's sort of part of the school system that, if they get accepted over here, then you get to go there for 11th and 12th grade, and this is a really cool school because people smoke pot there, and it's a whole lot easier. You have a chance of actually graduating through high school. I had no thoughts about going to college and stuff, but for some reason I felt like I did want to graduate from high school, I guess.
Did you learn anything in vocational high school? I mean, did you learn a trade, or what happened?
I got much better grades there. I remember that. Looking back, I'd say that I was probably treated a little bit differently and probably a little bit better than I had been in regular high school. I didn't fit in with the academics or the people that played the sports and stuff like that because I didn't learn about any of that stuff.
What were some of your dreams back then as a young kid? What did you want to be when you grew up?
I don't know if I thought about that kind of stuff. I remember really young, I probably thought about, the typical kind of stuff like a fireman or an astronaut or something. And as I got older and older, I probably thought, I remember starting to drink a little bit and to start to use drugs, somewhat regularly around 13 or 14. And I I don't know really what I wanted to be.
You certainly didn't want to grow up and be an addict or an alcoholic.
No, I didn't even know what it was at the
Yeah.
time. I just wanted to try to be alive and try to be happy and try to be loved and tried to try to figure out. But I didn't even really know what any of that stuff was at the time. I mean, I had no guidance about education or what to do with my life or how to save money or, it was just.
Were there anybody in your life that would say, Darryl, you got a real problem here. You need to get your act together?
No, I didn't have anybody like that until later when I had gotten into relationships and stuff. What I did have was some people at an early life, like through my church or some different people. Like actually I had some relatives, like a great aunt and uncle, that regardless of all the chaos and regardless of my acting out, they really loved me and supported me and told me that I was a good person. That's stuff that now, so many years later, that I'm really being able to hold on to with my recovery and stuff.
That unconditional love.
Unconditional love that I wasn't getting it from the places that, I look back now and thought maybe I should have got it from, but I didn't really know. You hear about people when you're young that have good parents and good family, and you see them. I remember, that people that friends and go and hang out with, thinking that they had really, really great arrangements and stuff compared to what I did. And, as time went by and as I'd gotten older and stuff, I realized that, they all came with their set of problems and stuff too. And, my father, apparently his father had left, his mother with the 3 kids when they were all really, really young and stuff. But I had gotten to meet him and stuff, and he was an alcoholic. And
Your grandfather.
My grandfather. And then, my grandmother had been married 4 times, and with her second husband, she had a liquor store. And by the time I was 9, she, with her third husband, she bought a bar. And, this was just real normal. My family and all of my relatives, they all had bars, the old 70s Midwestern vinyl bars in their basements and stuff, and
A lot of partying, a lot of drinking.
Shotguns on 4th of July and the whole 9 yards. And my father had given me alcohol as far back as I could remember, just kind of in small doses and stuff. And then when we went to weddings or something, and I was a kid, and my father was buzzed up, and then he'd kind of think it was kind of cute and give me a little bit of liquor then and stuff. And then I'd kind of been starting to get the taste for it. So I found myself sneaking it at the weddings. I had a friend that when I was about 13 or 14, this was just the kind of people that were surrounded by me. And his father was making moonshine in his basement in the big 55-gallon drums. I'd go over to my friend's house, and he would get us drunk, and he would laugh at us and watch us stumbling around. We were 13, 14 years old, and when I was 16 years old, I remember my father saying, you're 16, so I think it would be okay if you drank in the house. 'Cause I don't want you going out on the street, so I think it would be better if I know you're going to be doing it anyhow, because I'd already been caught with that, and I don't even really recall even doing it that much because I wasn't really comfortable. I think that was his way of kind of bonding with me or something. I've through a lot of work that I've gotten a lot closer with my father the last couple of years, but back then we didn't really have any bond or anything, and I think maybe that was a way of reaching out and stuff. And I remember I graduated from high school. My parents had been separated somewhere around the time I was 15, 16, and so I was living with my mom after that. When I was 17, I graduated from high school, and my mom went out and got us 3 or 4 cases of beer, and I remember being around that age, and my friend was playing drums in a musical at the church that I went to, and my mom went down. I asked my mom to go get us a bottle of wine, and
she did.
She went out and got us a bottle of wine. I mean, my mom, she advocated. I know I started smoking cigarettes. I was about 11 or 12 years old, sneaking them from my mom. And, by the time I was, towards the age of 14, 15 years old, she'd be giving them to me once in a while when I had asked for them and stuff, and never really condoning it or anything, because that's what she had always done,
Now, the friends that you hung out with, were they in similar situations where their parents were also being permissive?
Oh, yeah.
So that was really kind of a Midwest kind of a thing.
I don't know if it was a Midwest thing. That's where
certainly
I was from.
In your zip code it was.
That was a Darryl W thing, and that was what my world was. That's really what my world was. I mean, that's as far back as I could remember when I started talking about the stories of meeting kids in elementary school and shoplifting and stuff. I mean, for some reason, these are the kind of people that I've been attracted to. And
when did you think, in your mind, when did that voice kind of kick in to tell Darryl that this is a little out of control?
Well, I don't know if there was one particular time, but I just knew from an early age. I mean, had youth groups when I was a kid, and I was getting drunk and passing out and stuff, and I just had just a lot of situations where I'd get drunk and pass out, and
Did you ever want to stop?
I'd say that there was times that I wanted to stop, and probably did for a couple of days or something, once I had really gotten into the heart of it and stuff. I knew a long time ago that I was whether I really acknowledged that I was an alcoholic, I didn't really do that until I was probably in my mid-20s, but I mean, I waved it like a badge of honor, my alcoholism at that point. I was a musician and I played in bands, and we had songs about drinking and getting drunk and throwing up and passing out, and we laughed
all the
about
fun
it.
things. Yeah.
We laughed about all the fun stuff, We laughed about it, and we got drunk about it, and we sang about it, and we played about it, and it was, some kind of crazy, joyous type of stuff, but there was a lot of misery stuff in there, and you kind of convince yourself that, the better times outweigh the worse. And
So as you get a little bit older, you're out of school now, and you're starting some career type stuff, but you're still drinking and using. And the consequences, are they increasing?
Oh, yeah, it hadn't even started that. I mean, I had started to get myself in trouble and stuff, but that was just the stuff that I told you about burning down the school and stuff. That was just the stuff that had just started at the beginning.
That was elementary school stuff,
That was
right?
elementary school. On my 18th birthday in New York, it was still an 18 state, and on my 18th birthday, I drove my car into a house, and I actually hit two people that were sleeping in their house. My car drove through the house and hit two people in their bed, and I took off. So I got a hit-and-run accident on my 18th birthday with a house, and I spent one night in jail, and that was it. And so then I went out to California, and I told them
You had a hit and run in a house.
I hit a house. And
So you hit a house, you go through the house, you pull up, you hit the bed,
yeah,
and then you back up?
and then I went and I parked my car
You backed up and backed out of the house?
and I drove away, and I parked my car like 3 streets away, went through the backyards and went into my house and passed out. But it just seems that everybody's seen my car because we were vacationing in another state. We were like,
I believe that would be the state of intoxication.
the state of intoxication. Yeah. I had out-of-state plates with a car that had like a piece of the house in the bumper, But
That'd be clue number one. I
that
believe,
would be clue number one.
Now, were these people hurt that you when you?
They weren't hurt. I mean, I didn't actually. My front of my car went through the actual wall of the house and hit the bed, but it wasn't as dramatic. I mean, these people weren't injured or anything, but it was nonetheless it was a pretty tragic thing. And what had happened is I drove 3 streets away and I went into my bed, and they woke me up and threw me in jail.
So they found you that night.
They
it
found me
wasn't hard
that
to find,
night.
right?
Yeah, and then I went out to California, and I told them that I never had a driver's license before. This was back before they really had computers and stuff, and they checked on this stuff. So I ended up getting getting a license in California. I got a job. I got fired from my job from being drunk and like high on like weed, and I tried to stab somebody, and this was all within 6 months of each other. That then I ended up having to go back to back where I grew up, and that was
So
just,
why didn't California work out for you?
well, I went back there like 3 times, went back and forth because of the people and family that I was living with. I had an ideal situation living on a farm, and we ended up getting kicked off of there because of some various situations. So then I ended up hitchhiking back, back home, back to Ohio, and it was just crazy. I mean,
And through it all, the alcohol and the drugs were consistent.
Oh,
You just
100%
kept
consistent.
right
There was a
on.
time in California when we were so drunk and high that we were like going to a concert, and I let my cousin drive. He drove through a barrier over like a small wall. I got 2 flat tires. We ended up parking in a police station parking lot, and we went to the concert, and we ended up, and the car was gone. And that's when we like figured it all out, and then I would be mad at my cousin for like the next like 10 years, because of that. And, he ended up dying in California, from heroin addiction. And, this was just the kind of stuff that was like going on in my life. I never went to college. I never had really much of a career. I was just a kind of a house painter or something, just completely to survive, to make it from one day to the next.
Did you learn a trade?
I was 19, 20 years old working at a Burger King, and I met a guy that was a Jehovah's Witness, and he happened to have a painting business, and this was like, this can't be any worse than being a guy that works at Burger King at like 19 or 20, so I started doing that, and that's what I've been doing ever since then. Drinking and drugging on the job the whole time, yeah.
Did your boss know that you were drinking and using?
I'm really surprised that he didn't. I mean, I would have to call in sick a lot of times, and I would be, I remember having to being so sick and hungover, having to throw up in one of the bathtubs of one of the apartments we were working on and flushing it down, and I couldn't deal with the boss and stuff that long, so I worked with them for a few years, and I went in business for myself.
Then you could drink by yourself, and nobody could give you any crap, right?
Yeah, and then I could hire people that were drinkers and people that smoked weed and stuff like I did. And
you kept your circle there of people who were using.
I did it for so long. My relationships that I had with women, and I played as a musician for 20 years, and it was with yeah.
How did that affect your creativity, your music playing? You don't know.
Well, I convinced myself, and I from the feedback and stuff that I had gotten from people, it was a bizarre, deviant group of people, but they loved what I was doing, and I was completely carefree. I was completely angry at the world, and
When does the bottom come? When does the end come of all of this?
Before I get to the very end, I'll try to do a rapid version of a lot of the bad stuff that I had left out. I talked about that first DUI incident that was when I was 18 years old, and I had my second incident didn't happen until about 11 years ago, when I had been playing as a musician in a club and leaving the club, and we did a photo shoot and stuff that night, and it was literally 12 hours I drank like an entire bottle of scotch, and smoked a lot of weed, and smoked cigarettes like crazy at the time, and I left the club about 3 o'clock in the morning, and the other people so I ended up driving my van into a brick wall on the freeway, landed in the freeway passed out, and a family pulled over and protected my body from getting hit by other cars, and I was helicoptered to the hospital. They spent 8.5 hours sewing my face back together. At that time I just was really mad because they made me go to meetings and put me on probation, and I didn't really have any idea like I do now this guy sewed my face back together for 8.5 hours, and I was just upset because they got me for drinking and drug
Was
paraphernalia.
this a suicide attempt?
No, it was driving home from a show. This is the way
You were just all tore up.
This happened to me so many times. I mean, I had been pulled over before, so drunk and having drugs and alcohol in the car before, and cops have shown the flashlight in there before. One time I was hungover and getting high on the way to go to work, and I hit a girl, that with my car. She was running down the street. She kind of wasn't paying attention to the walk signal, and I wasn't really paying very good attention to where I was going, and I ended up hitting her, and she literally flew through the air over my car and landed in the street. She jumped up and ran away. I freaked out. I did pull over, and I waited, but none of this stuff stopped.
Did you ever make the connection that maybe some of this behavior is caused by the alcohol or drugs?
I didn't until later. I had a relationship. I had one long-term relationship I lived with the woman and her daughter, and it was just really, really chaotic. I had some illicit activity, sexually with, people that were married, and I had a girlfriend at the time when she was working, and I went and met somebody else, and she came back from work to the house and found me with somebody else. And this was the kind of activity, I mean, it's I'm just being completely honest with where I was. It's looking back at it now, it's not anything that I'm proud of or happy about. But I guess it was about 4 years ago I got my third DUI, and it was on Valentine's Day. And we had gone out. We were drinking for so many hours. I had gotten pulled over by the police, and I just got out of the car and put my hands behind my back. They asked me if I wanted to take this test, walk. I said, don't even bother. I'm not going to be able to pass any of that stuff. And then they made me go to meetings again and everything. And I mean, my anger and my anxiety and my depression in my life was just so obvious. I I always had this feeling, that everything was going to work out just around the corner. Things were going to be better, but things weren't getting any better. And I had been, I was close to at that point. I was about 42 years old, and I never did have a regular job. I had that job with those guys, 25 years earlier. But after that point, I never. I've got my life, which is like better than all that stuff. But I came out to Seattle, and I really,
Why Seattle, Darryl?
I had an opportunity to move out here with some people and stay in their basement, and these were people that I partied with and knew back where I grew up. And I just recently told my sister when I began my recovery that I came out here to drink and drug myself to death. And part of me thought I could come out and be part of this great music scene and this great all the hiking and the camping and everything, but I didn't do any of that stuff. I went hiking. We went on a camping trip once for 2 days, and we took 2 bottles of booze. We took a carton of cigarettes, and we took a bunch of marijuana, and I think we hiked 9 miles in 3 days, and that was the only hiking trip that I've ever taken out here in 4 years.
Darryl, talk about the end, because from every end there becomes a beginning.
For several years, I had been drinking pretty much, I'd say for the last 4 or 5 years, I had been drinking pretty much every single day, unless I was so physically sick that I couldn't. But at the end there, I was drinking. I was working, but I was angry at the people I was working with. I was angry at the people I was working for. I was angry at the next door neighbor. I was angry at the people I was living with. And, that's my life had been drinking and drugging and
being angry at people.
And being angry, and that was it. And at the end, I was drinking about a half a fifth of booze, hard liquor, and 2 or 3 beers, every single night, and doing drugs during the day and at the night with it, and smoking my cigarettes. And I passed out and blacked out 7 nights a week, and woke up every single day feeling horrible and just going right back through the routine.
Any thoughts when you woke up of saying, I don't want to do this anymore?
I'd started to go to some, as much as I hated the idea, I actually started to go to and throughout that last several months, I started going to a couple of AA meetings, but I think I got 4 days in a row sober, but, far from clean because it takes months. And, but I wasn't so sure, but what had happened is I had gotten alcohol poisoning.
How did that happen?
My body started to shut down. I mean, literally, my motor functions and my speech and everything started to shut down. And, it got to the point where I was laying on the ground and trying to push more booze into my mouth, and it was just falling out of my mouth. And I was just laying on the ground. And seeing that I had no insurance or anything, the people I lived with wanted to take me to the hospital and stuff. And I said, no, I'm just going to either make it on my own here or not. And, after several days of literally just laying on the ground, I started to prop myself up in the chair and then go on the internet and found I found a detox program. After about 4 or 5 days, I was able to get out of the house for 15, 20 minutes at a time before I had to lay back down. And I went and talked to a nutritionist at the PCC, and I let her know exactly my first step about being honest about who I was and where I was. And she gave me some advice about the detox and said I was on the right track with this thing I actually found on my own on the internet.
So you detoxed yourself?
I detoxed myself, but the thing was, I realized that I had to quit drinking alcohol, but I'm a marijuana addict as well, and I continued to smoke marijuana for 2 more months. But after that 2 months, I was like, you know what, it's not just, it's a combination of everything. And meeting. So I went to my first meeting, and they started talking about, your life's going to get better, and, you can be happy, and, you could start to sort of clear up all this stuff to some extent. And, I wanted to believe them and stuff, and, and I kind of had to believe them. And I kind of figured that partially they were just saying that to get me to keep coming around, and partially they were exaggerating it a little bit and stuff. But, that's where I had first started talking. They started talking about the 90 meetings in 90 days. And then they were also saying, but if you're really messed up, you should think about 1,000 meetings in 1,000 days. And, I'm 22 meetings away from 1,000 meetings. And and I've got 2 years, and I'll have 5 months here on the 14th. And I don't know, higher power, some kind of a spiritual awakening. I'm not really so sure. I mean,
Talk about your first AA meeting. Do you remember that?
My first meeting wasn't an AA meeting, but I don't really differentiate anything. I think they all do the same thing. It was definitely a 12-step meeting. They are all founded from Alcoholics Anonymous, which started back in the 30s. It was at some restaurant down in South Seattle. I think it was around Tukwila. I can't even remember the name of the meeting or where it was at. I mean, I was a mess. It was just people really welcoming me and accepting me and just telling me that it was going to be all right. And
Did you stay clean and sober from that point on?
I stayed clean and sober from that day on. I went to meetings 7 days a week. I went to 500 meetings in my first 365 days of sobriety.
Wow.
I went through 4 sponsors in the first 5 weeks.
Why would you go through the sponsors?
Because they weren't calling me back when I needed to be called, when I needed to talk to somebody. They weren't giving me or responding to me the way that I needed to be. And I finally found the guy that I started working with. I can't really remember the exact date, but I think it was within the first 6 weeks. And I started going to business meetings and district meetings, within my first couple months. I mean, I knew that this is where I had to stick and this is where I had to stay. When I had 5 months, I got another sponsor. I got an additional sponsor.
Little extra help.
I got a little extra help. I needed to always be able to make sure that there was somebody there that I could call. I needed to make sure that, my 2 sponsors, I love them. They're just been so great, but they're different, not better or worse or
just
right
different.
or wrong. They're just different, and they offer me different things. And another thing is when I started doing the step work, it was kind of I was backing up one from the other, making sure that I was getting this right or as right as I could. And so within 3 months, I was going into treatment centers, talking about my addiction and my recovery. Within 6 months, I was doing it even more full time. And within a year, I was secretarying meetings. I was secretarying district meetings. After a year, I started taking over several committees, chairs, and coordinator positions.
It sounds suspiciously like growth to me.
Suspiciously.
So now, living in the solution, a lot of service work. You've put a lot of time and effort into your recovery. What's it like for you today?
Well, it's great. I mean, it's life. I mean, there's problems and there's there's joys and there's sorrows, but it's different. It feels different. It looks different.
Do you get any compulsion now to use?
I have very little compulsion. I often think about, kind of reminisce about in my mind about what it used to be like, and I'm still completely baffled by the fact that I'm actually living this life now. It's something that I was really pretty much adamantly opposed to, the idea of living a clean and sober life for so long. I mean,
it's a miracle, Darryl, that you're alive.
It's a miracle that each and every one of us is alive, and I didn't really get to discover that until I had gotten my sobriety. I didn't really realize what a gift that life itself was, and we may or may not only have so much time in our life, and what we do with our life is what it is.
What do you say to somebody out there who's struggling, who's been in and out of those rooms over and over and thinking, I'm never going to make this?
Well, I'd say that there's no guarantees, but if you do what they ask you to do, if you're willing to be honest with yourself and you're willing to do a lot of hard work, that there is a solution. My biggest thing for myself, I'd like to say is, being able to realize that I can be a participator and a contributor in life instead of just sucking out anything positive or possible out of it. What I did for so long is just an incredible change. I love and respect each and every one of you and appreciate the opportunity.
You are living proof, Darryl, that you don't have to die for a drink.
No, you sure don't.
I appreciate you stopping by and sharing your experience, strength, and hope with our listening audience. And again, congratulations on 2 years and 4 months in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Darryl. What a turnaround. By the way, I want to remind listeners of this podcast, if you'd like to tell your story of recovery, regardless of the path you've chosen, as long as you have been in continuous recovery for a year or more, I'd sure like to know about it, and I'd like to share your story with our listeners. Drop us a note at recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Now, coming up next, actor Charlie Sheen talks about decisions in recovery and making amends. We'll do that in 30 seconds.
She has always been your baby, but when your daughter got into drugs and alcohol, she turned into a stranger. What do you do? Where do you turn? Contact Sundown M Ranch. Sundown's nationally recognized youth treatment program guides young people back to a life free of drugs and alcohol. All treatment is gender specific and directed by caring certified professionals in a safe environment. You can get your daughter back and get to know her again. Go to www.sundown.org to learn more.
And now, as promised, some interesting comments from actor Charlie Sheen on recovery, decisions, and making amends.
It's not always the drugs and the booze, it's the decisions you make in those headspaces. And I'm just not in those headspaces anymore. And that's a freaking relief. When people start getting a sense that your energy is shifted and your aura is kind of groovy, that they're not in danger to be around you, that they're not at risk. That's how I've been making amends, just living better and behaving better and just being available for whatever's next.
That wraps up this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. If you've enjoyed our podcast, please share it with others. We'd certainly appreciate it. You can find all of the podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, our email, recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Please hit the subscribe or follow button. It's free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. If you're considering treatment for a friend or a loved one, be sure and visit NAATP.org/AID. That stands for the Addiction Information Directory. It's a list of those treatment programs that adhere to strict ethical guidelines. One of them, of course, is Sundown M Ranch, but there's a lot of other ones around the country as well. And we encourage you to check out findsupport.gov. That's a website designed for individuals, families, and friends, including how to pay for treatment and some low-cost and free treatment options. You'll also find healthcare support, how to help someone else, or find help for yourself, all in one place, findsupport.gov. And join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. And another shout-out to our sponsoring organization, Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins, sundown.org. I'm Neil Scott reminding you to stay healthy, live in gratitude, and be kind to others. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.